Welcome, everybody, to the latest episode of War Stories. This is the real star of the show here, Tony Roberts of Analog Toys. Tony, how are you?
Very, very nervous, Michael.
You're nervous. Why?
I have never been on a channel before that has 110,000 subscribers. It's a big deal, okay? I was going to say 100,000, but what a crazy couple of weeks it's been for you and the channel.
Yeah, this has been really weird, and I'm not trying to do the humble brag thing. You know me real well. This is legitimately weird for me. It's like, huh? So that's why I went out today and did that video to kind of warn the new 11,000 subs. I'm like, are you sure you know where you are? I just want to be clear. Like, I don't want a lot of customer complaints on the rating cards when the first few weeks go by. Like, I want to let you know what you're in for now, so that you can decide what you want to do. It's been weird because the smoke screen effect has been very much at play, where I thought we were seeing a rise in our subs because of Articulated Ninja's video about the Hell Charger. And then I thought, oh, cool, we're getting a little bit of a bump from him just making people aware of us. And then all of a sudden, this Lego video started doing well, but we don't know if it was the Lego video that it had to have been part of it. So it's like all this happened at the same time. And it was just kind of like boom, 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 boom. And so now I'm going, I thought it was going to like die off at like 101 and a half. Like, I thought it'd be like maybe 101 and a half. And it's like, nope, we're at 110 and 300 and climbing. Like, okay, fine. Great. Yeah. Crazy week.
Congratulations, though, man. It's very well deserved.
And congratulations to you're at 42 and what now?
Almost 43.
Because
I passed 42,900 this morning.
Yeah.
3POA is at 2,100. It's all converged at just the right time. I think Bobby's just clinical performance on not the last 3POA, the one before. The breakdown of the Hell Charger was just it was like watching a university professor just give his greatest lecture ever, in the style that Bobby Valor would do it. Yeah, and I think all of these things have just converged at the same time. Actually, because it was that live stream on the 3POA where we had Articulated Ninja in the chat, which I think for the first time, you were in the chat, Talker Art was in the chat, and Articulated Ninja was saying in the chat, hey, Michael was the one who was first saying this 4 years ago, and then a day or so later, this video comes out, and
Right. Yeah,
we're not alone anymore, Michael.
I appreciate that. I really do. And it was very humbling. It was, but I didn't expect the deluge of subscribers. And I know there was this kind of like coincidence with the Lego video happening.
Yeah.
And so it's like, people are like, you're going to become a Lego channel now. And as you and I both know, you can't bank on a trend continuing consistently. It's like, just because one video about a topic does well, the next video about that topic could face plant, even if it's a better video. It just,
we've joked about it in the private chat. I think I said to you, you'll see the success. Michael runs off and does another Lego video, and it just bombs.
Oh yeah, I'll put just as much effort into that Galaxy Explorer video, and it'll be like a 10,000 view video. That's what'll happen. I really appreciate the kind words. TJC says now that they've joined, there's no going back. They'll be here to stay. What were you going to say, Tony?
I was just going to say I've known you and your channel long enough to know that that's also not the way you would pivot after the success of a Lego video.
No.
Mine was like, oh, Lego did really well, I'm going to go and do Star Wars Follies, or
or I'm finally gonna go do that Elizabeth Sladen documentary and really knock people's socks off. I'm like you, Tony, in the sense that I have so many interests within pop culture that I like to spread the wealth a little bit, because those thumbnails, like I know people are like, when are we going to talk about the movie? We're going to talk about the movie. I promise. We're going to talk about it in a minute. But I see those channels that are devoted to like one thing, where it's like Star Wars or, Game of Thrones, or something like that. And it's just all videos about that all the time. And I go, how does one do that? Like, I don't know if I could do that. I'm not saying I'm not saying I'm superior. I'm saying I'm not wired that way. Like, I can't just index on the same thing over and over again. Like you could tell me, Michael, we're going to give you a 1 million subscriber Kylie Minogue channel tomorrow. And I'd be like, well, I love the woman, but I don't think I could do video after video after video after video after video about her, you know? And they'd be like, if you do anything else, we're going to take the whole channel away from you. And then one day I try to
make it a channel about Kylie Minogue and Danny Minogue.
Right. Like one day I sneak in a video about Sophie Ellis Bextor and suddenly they take the channel away from me. I'm like, oh, I tried. I really tried. You know? Anyway, so everybody, we are here to talk about Hell in the Pacific tonight. This is a 1968 war film starring Lee Marvin and Toshiro Mifune. You know him best as the star of all of Kurosawa's classic works.
Yeah.
And you know Lee Marvin from The Dirty Dozen and The Big Red One and a number of other great films, including Point Blank. Now, Point Blank is related to this because this is a John Boorman film. Yep. And he had just done Point Blank with Lee Marvin, and Lee Marvin was excited to work with him again. He was a fresh new director, and they decided to do this together. Tony, when was the first you'd ever heard of this movie?
That's really hard to say. I've known of this film for a long, probably since childhood. You know, I recognize the iconography of the poster and that kind of thing. And the strange thing is, I've been a fan of Point Blank for a long time. And I was aware that it had the same director. It's also the John Boorman directed Excalibur, Deliverance.
Yep.
I've just never got around to watching it. And that's one of the greatest things about sitting down with you every 2 weeks on a Friday for an episode of War Stories is that it encourages me. It's like, oh, I've got to go watch this film this week. And sure, you know, we've had some stinkers along the way. You know?
I was about to make a joke. I was like, yeah, guys, being my friend means that every 2 weeks you might be sitting down to watch Hell in the Pacific or Flyboys. You never know. It could be one or the other.
Yeah, well, on the flip side, like I was the one who suggested Hurt Locker.
But you did that as like a kind of landmine. Like you knew how I was going to feel. Whereas me, on the other hand, I admitted I don't remember enough about Flyboys to know how either of us are going to actually receive this, because my brain was like, it was watchable, but obviously you don't hate it because you've never ranted about it in a video before.
Yeah.
And then we rewatched it, or I rewatched it and you watched it. And the whole time I was thinking, oh my God, in Port Hedland, Australia, this man is hating me right now. He's hating me right now. King Eric the Greatest, thank you for the super chat. He says, hello, Tony and Michael. I have a World War II map, early war, that I'd like to send to either one of you. I sent pictures to Messenger and the RetroBlasting Gmail account. I will look into that, King Eric. I appreciate it. I don't know where you're based, but if you are in Australia, then I would send it to Tony for the safety of your wallet for postage. Yeah. So you saw the poster, but you hadn't really watched it. So is this the first time you've seen it?
Yes.
Oh,
yep.
Wow.
I watched it 2 days ago for the first time, and I just want to lay out my. I got about 20 minutes into the film, and my brain was just going, "This is wholly unique. It's a special film." That would never ever get made today,
right?
And I sat through the rest of it, thoroughly enjoying the film, just thinking, I'm so glad I do this show with Michael, because I may have gone the rest of my life and never sat down to watch it for whatever reason. It's a very special experience.
It's a wonderful movie, and I can't wait for us to discuss it. But I want to tell you that, unlike yourself, I had the most shallow of reasons for ending up watching it, because I watched it for the first time 3 years ago when I got it on Blu-ray as part of like a sale from one of those companies where they put out official catalog titles, but they do limited runs of them. So it was like a limited disc in their library. And so I grabbed it. And the reason I grabbed it was because this is produced by Selmer Productions. Well, I had read one of my favorite World War II TV shows is Combat. That was a Selmer production in the early 60s, and it was produced by Selig J. Seligman. Well, in one of these write-ups that I was reading in one of these books, it was talking about the history of Combat. They mentioned that Selig J. Seligman would go on to do a World War II movie called Hell in the Pacific. So I was like, ooh, I got to see what that's all about. So I ran off and I found it, and then I realized John Boorman, Lee Marvin, holy crap, Toshiro Mifune, how have I missed this? It's crazy. So that's how I ended up watching it. But I heard a noise. Sorry. For everybody who hasn't seen this movie is this. It's a very straightforward premise. It is the story of a Japanese Navy officer in World War II who has escaped a sinking, we assume. We don't really see that part. But he's been on an island for maybe a week, a few days, hard to say. And he notices that there is a U.S. Navy aviators rescue raft that is washed up onto the beach, onto the shoreline. And that's when he freaks out because he thinks, I'm not alone. The gimmick of this movie, and I don't mean gimmick in like the pithy way. I mean gimmick in like, this is kind of this very unique thing that Tony was just inferring a second ago.
Yeah.
I
would say the pitch, when John Boorman was probably pitching it to the studio. It's like, it's not the gimmick. This is the pitch. This is why this film is unique and special.
Yeah. Would you like to describe it to everybody? Like, really?
Yeah. Well, it's a very, very contained story about obviously two military men stranded on a desolate island in the Pacific. One's Japanese, one is American, one speaks English, one speaks Japanese. There are no subtitles in this film. You never ever know unless you speak Japanese what the hell Toshiro Mifune is saying.
Right.
Could you imagine if this film had been directed by Oliver Stone?
Oh God, no. Like, I like Oliver Stone with some of his work, but like we said with Platoon, like, God.
Lee Marvin would have narrated the whole thing to explain to the audience. Yeah. I really appreciated that it didn't play the audience for fools. You really have to think of, and I've got a few questions in my head, which we'll probably get onto as we go through the clips and kind of go through the story. I've still got a few questions in my head as to, I'm not quite sure about that, but I like that coming out of a film. I knew there was layers and details there that I didn't understand, and it made me want to go off and do some more research. So
yeah, John Boorman had this idea that if two people from two different nations, two different language speaking nations were stranded on an island together, enemies or not, they would have a communication barrier. And so the idea was, and this was back in the late 60s when I think Hollywood was pretty much at its most daring, like 68 to 78, I think was its most daring era. And he said, let's not put any subtitles in it, and let's get a Japanese writer to come in and write all of Toshiro Mifune's side of this scenario. And then we'll have an American writer write all of Lee Marvin's side. We'll give them sort of the beats, like what the plot has to happen. And then like, in this part, they're like trying to figure out, how to live with one another. In this part, they're trying to figure out how to build a raft in this part. And then the two writers just went off and wrote their own stuff. Well, what I loved about what John Boorman said about the film was that he fully intended for this to be a unique experience for Japanese audiences and for English-speaking audiences. So his exact quote was, the film actually doesn't work if you know both languages, which I thought was really interesting. I'm like, okay, so if you know Japanese fluently and you know English fluently, and you're watching this movie, then the exchanges really won't make sense and you will be confused because they don't speak each other's language. So they're trying to convince each other of things, and they're yelling things to one another without knowing what the response back was or anything like that. Like they're both living in their own moment. I find that fascinating filmmaking. Like,
Yeah.
holy crap. And Toshiro Mifune's translator, who was on set the whole time on location on this island, there was also a cultural barrier where he was pleased as punch to do the movie. And he really got along well with Lee Marvin because both of those guys were World War II veterans. So Lee Marvin was a Marine sniper in the Pacific, and Toshiro Mifune was in the photography, the aerial reconnaissance group. And he also, allegedly, according to some sources, he also did the tea ceremonies for kamikaze pilots during the war as well, which is really heavy. But both of those guys got along like gangbusters. It was, even though they had a language barrier, like they were like, you know, they were military guys. They got each other. They understood each other.
Yeah, they were both military guys, but they were also those very unique, true movie stars that we used to have back then, where you know, no offense to Lee Marvin. I'm a huge Lee Marvin fan. No offense to him. He's not like he's not like a Brad Pitt handsome kind of guy.
No.
He's just a man. He's actually got a very unusual look, you know. He's got spiky eyebrows and big nostrils, but he can command the screen. And both men shared that. I imagine those two really would have gotten along well because they had the shared military experience, but then also that experience of being the leading man in some very masculine films. You know, some black and white samurai movies, and obviously, you know, Lee Marvin's done all sorts of stuff. So
somebody is challenging what I just said about Lee Marvin in the chat. This was information that I was given from John Boorman in his interview about Lee Marvin. So before we get pedantic, let's look at this. Serving as a member of I Company, Lee participated in 21 Japanese landings and was wounded in action on June 18th, 1944 during the assault on Mount the Battle of Saipan. He was hit by machine gun fire, which severed a sciatic nerve. So he was in a Marine division that would jump behind enemy lines. And it says right here, Lee served in the 4th Marine Division as a scout sniper in the Pacific Theater during World War II. So, Mr. Lax Sivrak, if you want to question John Boorman's knowledge of his personal friend Lee Marvin again, I suggest you do it on your own time. All right, we're going to continue. Okay, so we have these two guys, and one of the things that I'm so glad you brought up, Tony, was about the actors themselves, how they're movie stars, but they're not Brad Pitt style movie stars. They're like, they have a presence. I was thinking that when we were watching the film, I was thinking about the fact that Lee Marvin and Mifune were now 25 years from the end of World War II. And that means that they are far older than they actually would have been in real life, meaning in their service. They're far older than a soldier at that time would have been. And yet I kept having this idea that it was like, these two guys were both in it, in this theater, on those sides of the battle. And it was almost like they were embodying, and I don't mean to get lofty, I simply mean that they were the perfect actors to use, because you could see on their faces the whole time that they inherently knew everything about this engagement. In other words, even though they were older than they literally would have been back then, it didn't really matter. It didn't, because they were so believable because they had lived it. Does that make sense? Like it?
Yeah, it does. And I think another very clever thing that they've done here is so that they're both playing officers. So Toshiro Mifune is a Japanese naval officer, and Lee Marvin is obviously, you know, is he an Air Force pilot, an Air Force officer?
Yes, he's some sort of he's a Navy pilot. He's clearly came off a carrier or something like that, and then got shot down. Yeah.
Top Gun.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, no, yeah. I think very early on you do see he's got captain's bars on. So,
Mhm.
so by making them officers, it wasn't jarring for me the fact that these guys are older than what they would have been in the war because they're playing slightly different roles.
Mhm.
Officers will tend to be older career soldiers. What a beautiful setting!
Mhm.
Like the
Yeah.
cinematography, that specific location, and you can tell that they didn't move around a lot because there's the beach that they're on is very unique. There's like a strip of sand and then a rock wall that kind of juts out, and
Mhm.
it was all filmed in that
Yep.
one location. I don't know how long they were out there for.
Oh.
I went to do a little bit of research,
Mhm.
which I do for most War Stories episodes. I tend to do it after I've watched the film. I want to watch the film on its own merits. And I pulled up the Wikipedia page for this, and there's really not a lot written down. I discovered that it lost money. I think it was a budget of 4 million and made 3 million back. And then I was like, you know what? I don't need to read any of that stuff.
Mhm.
I've just had this terrific movie viewing experience, and I'm content just with that. So
Yeah. Yeah, it's so good that you don't even have to like go diving for something to check its veracity or anything like that.
yeah,
It's just such a solid story. Um, we're gonna get to some clips here in a minute, but because the story is so beautifully straightforward, it's easy to set everything up. One of the cultural barriers that John Boorman found himself in with Mifune during this time period was um, during the production of it. Apparently, the Japanese writer and Boorman had some notes, and then for some reason the notes had been, you've written him just like his character in the Seven Samurai, who is a more goofy character. I don't want a goofy Japanese officer. This is supposed to be a tense character study. We need to rewrite this tonally before we go into production because I want to make sure that Mifune understands. The Japanese writer ended up giving Mifune the original version of his side of the script. So Mifune memorized this. He always would memorize an entire script as a sense as a professional and also a sense of honor for the director and the writer before he would show up on set. So he had the whole script memorized, and he was playing it like the character almost in Seven Samurai, very goofy and a little bit more comedically. And John Boorman was just like on the first day of shooting, like, oh my God, what's going on? And culturally, it would be very bad to correct or criticize or adjust a Japanese actor's performance, especially one of Mifune's notoriety, in
yeah,
public. So the translator was constantly begging John Boorman not to give Mifune any corrections. And John Boorman was like, we have to because you've given him the wrong script. And so it became this like back and forth. And so he and Mifune actually didn't get along on the set very easily because they would have to go back to the boat at night and then go through all the corrections. And then the next morning, Mifune would show up for the next round of shots and he'd be the goofy guy again. And so it was like this whole like, oh, it was like they were pulling hair out. Anyway, long story short, Boorman accidentally injured his foot on the reef on a coral under the water. And as you probably know, you then have to go to a hospital and get that specially
yep,
cared for because that can become very dangerous. So while he was out for several weeks, they came to Mifune, the producers, and said, we understand that the show must go on and that you and John Boorman haven't had the easiest working relationship. He's going to be out for several weeks. We can replace him and keep going if you just give us the word. And Mifune actually looked at the producers and he's like, no, that's dishonorable to do that. Like, I signed on with John Boorman. We're going to finish this movie together.
yeah.
And it's like, oh my God, I wish I could be like Toshiro Mifune. He's such a badass. Like, there's just something so cool about the guy. Bradshaw Studio, thank you for the super sticker. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Yeah. And all right, everyone. So now we're going to get into some clips. So it very quickly establishes in this film that they're stranded on this island. Mifune finds the raft, but he's not immediately aware that there's necessarily anybody there. It could just be that the raft showed up, and he needs the resources because he's got his water stand set up to catch rainwater. He's got his campfire where he's smoking fish. He's got his fish traps out in the shallows where he's checking for fish, fish catch, caught fish catch. He's checking for caught fish every morning. So he's kind of got his camp set up while he's trying to figure out what he's going to do. And he finds this raft. Well, we already know from John Boorman's shooting of it, we know Lee Marvin's there. He doesn't. But Lee Marvin is only just discovering that Toshiro Mifune is there. So it becomes this kind of thing where Lee Marvin watches the Mifune take his whole raft away and start scavenging all the stuff out of it to see what he can use. And then Lee Marvin sees his water stand and he's like, I'm really thirsty. I need some water. He's got his army or his military belt, his equipment belt. He's got his equipment belt. He's got a canteen on it and a few other basic things. And he's like, I got to get to that water. I have a clip here of the first time they actually see one another. And it's okay. I'll just play it.
Yep.
Like it's high noon. Like it's like, okay, we're both enemies in combat. We're in the middle of this war. Like here we are. Now we're facing off against one another, and our first instinct is to kill one another. And then the weirdest thing happens, and it's the only time, Tony, in this movie that I got pulled out of it. And it wasn't because of what Boorman did. It's because everybody in the late 60s was obsessed with hiring Lalo Schifrin to do their damn music. And and here's the thing, guys. Lalo Schifrin, he's great in like the Pink Panther and stuff like that. And in this movie, by and large, his music is pretty restrained and pretty controlled. Like he has a few stylized moments. But here what happens is Lee Marvin and Mifune both visualize how they could murder the other guy. Yeah. And it's kind of a hat trick because you think for a moment, oh my God, one of them just murdered the other dude. But then it flips and I think they show both, if I recall. Like
they show both. Yeah.
Yeah. And Lalo Schifrin just decides, you know what? I'm going to paint the town red with my music on this one. I'm going to just tonally go. This is the only time in the movie where I'm like, Lasai. So here's just a sampling. Sounds like a constipated cat. Like, it's just like, I don't understand why he did that.
That was very jarring for me as well. Not the editing and the fact, that they're visually telling you what both two men are kind of thinking. Lee Marvin wants to kill this guy, Toshiro Mifune wants to kill the American. When I watched that scene and that music, I was like, did John Boorman take the day off and did Quentin Tarantino direct that one scene?
Right. It was very weird. And thankfully, it's the one dated stylistic moment in the whole film. Like there are other moments where they kind of stylize it because Boorman is John Boorman. He was a very in that time director. But this was the only one of those that pulled me out of the film. It was like, what? Like, oh God, Lalo Schifrin, there he is stroking himself again. I can't believe it. Just like, oh. At that point, it becomes a story in the first quarter. The first quarter of the movie is really all about Lee Marvin trying to get to Mifune's water trough. He's trying to get some fresh water. He's dying of thirst. His canteen's empty. He's just trying to get some water. That's all he wants. And there's this really cool moment where right after the scene we just saw, he goes running over with that tree branch and his knife. He's got his Marine K-bar, and he runs over to the water trough, but Marvin or Mifune has a stick that he's holding like a samurai sword to stop him. And Marvin does this cool move where he knows he's not going to be able to get a drink without getting his ass kicked. So he just blends into the jungle with this branch, and it's the coolest, weirdest shot. I wish that I could use that instead of Homer Simpson backing into the hedge for my gift. Like the next time I see somebody say something I want nothing to do with, I think I'm going to try and pull that moment instead of Lee Marvin just being like, okay, here we go. Like, and at this point, I was thinking in the film, Tony, I was like, well, what's interesting about this, and I'm glad you brought up Oliver Stone as well, because this movie makes no pointed commentary about who was on the right or wrong side of this conflict. It's not concerning itself with some sort of political statement. It's not trying to sell you on some propaganda. It's simply just showing how two guys who need to survive, who are supposed to be enemies, are trying to work it out. Like they're trying to, I found that really refreshing. I don't know if you did, but I did.
Very much so. I really think at the crux of this, it's such a stripped back story where literally, as you said, the first quarter of this film is literally just Lee Marvin trying to steal some of Toshiro Mifune's water. That's all. That's all it's about. And I think that the underlying part there is, when all of that, the political context of the war and when all of that is stripped back and there's no one else to comment, criticize, or judge, it's just you and this other person on this island, shows some of the better sides of humanity, I suppose. And maybe in a way we're better off not having all that outside noise. Like for you and me, it would be like we just made YouTube videos and never read comments. There was no like dislike button. There was none of that. We just put them out there and then we go off and make the next one. That sounds blissful.
Oh, it's like utopia. Oh, it's like a dream. The other thing that I was noticing is that they were very, very careful and measured to make sure that they perfectly allotted for beard growth on both of these guys throughout the movie. So their faces slowly disappear. And by the middle of the film, as they're trying to build the raft, they not only, the longer the film goes on, the more they get along, but the longer the film goes on, the more they end up looking like laser pants. So I have to believe that Ryan is onto something where if you just grow a beard and your enemy grows a beard, you will both grow together. But in all seriousness, it is kind of a measuring stick of the farther the more their beards grow out, the farther they get away from the war and more about day-to-day survival. And so it becomes more of we've forgotten these geopolitical conflicts and now we're just focused on our own coexistence and humanity. They're going to go through a lot more conflicts here that we're going to showcase in a second. I'm not skipping over anything, but I just wanted to point that out because I thought it was so sophisticated of the movie. You don't think about it when you're watching it, but then the beards come back into play later at the very end. And that's when I realized, I was like, oh, there was no continuity error from the time they first are seen on the island to as things progress. And from what I was told, with rare exception, they shot this whole movie in chronological order.
So I would think they would have to, because I could even see Toshiro Mifune. He always had a very slight frame anyway. The build of a fit, athletic Japanese person is always going to, low body fat kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Lee Marvin starts the film, quite lean. I
Mm-hmm.
could visually see him getting thinner as well as the
Mm-hmm.
beard was getting bigger. His
Yep.
frame was getting thinner and thinner.
Yeah.
He was hung, and I imagine they, during the production, that was a very deliberate thing. He
Mm-hmm.
probably continued to diet and try and lose weight as the production went on. So
Mm-hmm.
it was very, very well done.
Yeah, apparently him and Boorman were really, really good friends, and after they did Point Blank together, and
Mhm.
he would just do anything for John Boorman. Like, apparently, the story goes is that Lee Marvin had the clout at that time in Hollywood with a certain studio, same studio he did this movie with, where he had script approval, he had production approval, he had right of first refusal on things, he could veto anything. And apparently he went into the brass of the studio and he looked at them and he said, I don't remember if it was for this movie or Point Blank, I can't remember which one, but he pissed off all the suits because he looked at them and he said, for the duration of this production, I'm just letting you guys know right now, I am deferring all of my authority to John Boorman. So you have to listen to him now. And if you don't, then that means if you try to veto Boorman, that means you're vetoing me. And they were mad. They were just like, so there's this story where I think it's toward the end of Point Blank, but it very well may be this movie. I can't remember. I think it was Point Blank. Boorman was having one of those days where he was trying to get his shots set up and he could not figure out how the sequence was going to be filmed. He just could not. I don't know if he was exhausted or what, but it was toward the end of the shoot and he was just like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And he was sitting down off to the side of the location and Marvin had a read on him. And so Marvin just kind of walked over and he said, hey, he said, you doing okay? He goes, are you in trouble? He goes, I'm just having a hard time visualizing this. I'm just having one of those days, it's not coming together for me. And Marvin's like, okay. So Marvin knew that the producers were going to put all this pressure on him, and that's when they get real mad. It's like, oh, you're burning daylight. You're burning our money. So before the producers had gotten wind that Boorman was having an off day, Marvin apparently walked away from Boorman, went about like 50 meters or something, and then just started acting like he was fall down drunk, like raving, ranting, just acting like sloppy drunk. And Lee Marvin was known for putting him back. Like he knew that.
Oh yeah.
So the production managers come running over to Boorman and they're like, oh my God, are you seeing this? We can't possibly film this way. We're going to have to wait. We're going to have to wait. And that's when Boorman realized, oh my God, Lee Marvin, just with his clout and with his personality, he knows how to play the chess game. He just bought me half a day to figure out this stuff. And sure enough, it took all the anxiety off of him. He figured everything out within a half hour. And then everybody was suddenly surprised that Lee Marvin just sobered up like that. And they filmed the rest of the day. Oh man. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to delay the proceedings, but I had to tell that story.
That was it. No, that was a wonderful story. I'm glad you told that. Lee Marvin was of that era of like the Richard Harris, and they were hard drinking men's men. Movie stars of it. I'm gonna do it. I'm sorry. I'm gonna bring Tom Cruise into this conversation. I don't know why.
Keith, hopefully you better be in the chat, my friend. You better be in the chat.
When people say that, and you've heard it, especially recently, he's the last true movie star.
No.
I'm like, no. Right. He's never even been a movie star like Lee Marvin's been a movie star, like Toshiro Mifune has been a movie star. Toshiro Mifune, as you said earlier, turned around to the producers and went, that would be dishonorable.
Yeah.
He's not screaming his head off at someone for not wearing a mask during COVID or
Right.
whatever.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he'd be like, I did like living funerals for men who flew airplanes into aircraft carriers. Like, yeah, I'm not worried about your garbage.
Yeah.
um, I'm doing the so thing. Sorry. Mifune at this point doesn't know where Lee Marvin's going to pop up next. He just knows that Lee Marvin wants his water and probably his food. So he comes up with this, and this is one of the other things I loved about the film, was that there was no indictment of either the Japanese soldier or the American soldier. It was very much both of them did some things that were right, and both of them did some things that were a mistake, and both of them kind of had to work out, their f ups, all that kind of stuff. So Mifune comes up with this plan, which we only see visually. Like, I don't, unless you're out there, I don't speak Japanese, but he doesn't talk to himself either, which is nice. They don't talk to themselves, and there's no inner monologue, as Tony pointed out earlier. So you're really just watching their actions, which is very refreshing. This is basically like G.I. Joe issue number 21, the movie. Like, it's,
I was thinking the same thing. This is, you can't tell me that when Larry Hama wrote Silent Interlude, he didn't have this in the back of his mind.
Had to have. Just like, obviously Enemy Mine borrows a lot from this movie. A lot.
Yeah.
That one episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, Darmok, borrows a lot from this movie. And yet they also missed the point, which was what makes this movie work is having an audience on the other side that understands the other half. Whereas, I hate to break it to the people who made Enemy Mine, as well written as it is and as nice of a time capsule as it is, there ain't no alien race that knows the language on the other side of the screen. So your experiment really doesn't have as much merit, I guess, what I'm saying. Mifune decides, hey, here's what I'm going to do. I've got to make this guy as uncomfortable as possible. I'm going to set the jungle on fire. And then after I get the fires hot enough, I'm going to throw a bunch of green leaves on it so it'll create smoke. I'm going to
literally smoke him out.
Smoke him out. Marvin is having to wrap a thing around his face. He's looking for other sources of water. The sources he finds are either brackish and they're filthy, or they are salt water. He's having a really, really bad time. Like, it's not going well for him. And he and Mifune, I guess, keep having these close encounters where it's like these kind of like they keep passing one another. And so there's moments like this where they're just continuing to harass one another. It's cat and mouse, or cat and cat. I don't know, or mouse and mouse. I don't know.
It very much is. But something I also appreciated is I think apart from that clip that you just showed where he just kicks him off the vine, that's the actual closest they come to a physical fight. Right. There's lots of standoffs, but not a fight. If this movie was made today, there would be 3 or 4 fights throughout this thing. And another thing I really appreciated as well was, I would almost say to a degree, that the Japanese character is depicted as the one who is maybe a little bit more better at this surviving gig on this island. They both make good and bad choices, and it's almost as though Lee Marvin's character makes a few more mistakes. It wasn't, the film wasn't sort of showing, because it's an American film, an American production. it wasn't showing the American as the superior soldier. It was
Right.
very, very equal ground. Yeah.
Very even-handed, like very even-handed. Like at first you almost think that it's going to show the American as a boor, because it's like,
Yeah.
not Boorman, boor, because you know, the Japanese soldier has his whole survival camp set up, and it seems like Lee Marvin just wants to steal all of it. Like he doesn't know how to. But then you start to see that, oh no, give it time. You'll see their individual characters come out. The smoke is so bad at this point that it's actually starting to impede Mifune's ability to even see like his own encampment and to defend himself. And Marvin ends up coming out of the smoke to try and reason with Mifune and talk to him for the first time. This is a little bit of that moment.
Look, all I want is some water. Well, you got plenty of those. Enough for everybody.
I love that. He's just like, you know what? I don't speak your language, but I'm just going to show you my canteen. I don't want to hurt you. I don't want us to fight anymore. Can I just have some water, please? And Mifune's just like, are you kidding me? Like, no, no. And then Mifune, the smoke, his own smoke, becomes an impediment, and he suddenly can't see. And this is where finally Lee Marvin gets the upper hand.
Yeah.
Well, he's put out the fires because Lee Marvin got away again after that last scene that I showed you. And then Lee Marvin's like, well, if I can't reason with him, then I'm just going to wait till he's asleep, and I'm going to lower a canteen down like some sort of Looney Tunes gag. Like I'm going to get that way. And of course, Mifune ends up pulling him down, and it breaks the whole water trough, and then Lee Marvin runs off. And there becomes this kind of crazy plan that Lee Marvin concocts where he has two magazines. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm skipping one part. The first thing he does is he decides, I'm going to try some psychological warfare.
Yeah.
So now Mifune has set up all of these hanging seashells to try and stop Lee Marvin from being able to encroach his perimeter without being heard. And Lee Marvin's like, well, I'm not even going to. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, just I'm glad you brought up the seashells, because I'd forgotten about that for a moment. You know, okay, it's an age-old tactic which was still being used in the British and the Australian military up until about 15 years ago. What we would do around 10, I want to say 15 or 20 years ago, ration packs we used to have tins of food. They now go to like foil bags where you can just put them in water. You boil the water, you've got the boiling water for your tea or coffee, and then you open up the bag and you've got this full bag. But back when we used to have tins of, pea and ham soup in the army rations, once you had eaten your meal, you would run a string line, 20 meters out from your perimeter, put a single stone inside the tin can, and then fold the lid over the line to hold it. So if anyone touched that line, you would hear the stone rattling around inside. It's like, we were still doing that 20 years ago. So just a little anecdote there. Yeah, and he does it with seashells. It's great.
Yeah. Lester San Jose, thank you so much for the kind super chat. He says, thank you for the deep dive, guys. You are welcome.
Thank you, Lester.
And we also have a super chat from Melinda. How is this film handled for the hearing impaired like me? RE subtitles. There is a subtitle track, and I assume for the English speaking world, the subtitle track is for Lee Marvin. And then if you get this disc in Japan, I bet you the subtitles are only for Mifune, and they're Japanese subtitles. If I was a betting person, that's what I would say.
Yeah, I would also go as far as to say that if you couldn't speak English or Japanese, you could still probably watch this film and understand about 70% of it anyway.
Yeah, I agree.
Because of the way it's structured, yeah.
Yep. Articulated Chad, thank you for the super chat. He says for the 1K. I assume you mean 100K.
Yeah.
But appreciate it. Much appreciated. And Master Son 42, thank you for the super chat. He says, same 3 seashells in Demolition Man. Hello, gentlemen. And then Jesus says, thank you for the super chat. He says, congrats on 100K RetroBlasting. You're cooler than Marky Mark. Well, thanks, bro. I appreciate it. All right. So we're now at a point where Marvin decides, I'm not going to try and breach the perimeter. I'm going to psychologically mess with this guy's head. And so he starts yelling and making noise out right beyond the jungle perimeter and just not shutting up so that Mifune cannot get any peace. This is a little bit from that sequence.
You'll be sorry. You'll be sorry.
It's freaking him out. He doesn't know what to do. But he's determined to keep this guy out. and then Lee Marvin comes up with this other just crazy idea where I don't know, the movie never explains why he didn't end up on the beach with his sidearm, but his equipment belt still has the 2 magazines for his 1911.
Yep.
So he starts throwing from the same vantage point where he was trying to use the canteen. He waits for Mifune to fall asleep, and then he starts taking the bullets out of the mag and throwing them into the embers of his campfire, hoping that they will heat up and then go off. They heat up, they go off. Mifune wakes up like he's under attack. Bullets are exploding everywhere. He hits the deck, jumps to one side and hits the deck. And then this happens. Lee Marvin, everyone, in a movie, pissed on Toshiro Mifune. I mean, I'm sure it wasn't actual urine in the production, but in the context of the story, there is a movie in which Toshiro Mifune's character gets pissed on by Lee Marvin.
Yeah.
I would like that to sink in for all of you. That means this qualifies as one of the top 10 craziest movies ever made. Like, in a good way. In a good way.
Yeah.
At this point, what were you thinking, Tony, as this was going on? Not the literal pissing part, but at this point in the movie, what were you thinking?
Well, so just prior to that, Lee Marvin's character, and I've just got to keep calling him Lee Marvin's character because we never learn their names.
Right.
The film doesn't need it. Yeah, he's doing this whole psychological warfare thing. He's got his empty metal canteen, he's got his K-bar knife, and he's banging it, and he's singing, and he's acting. He's probably acting like he was the day that the producers thought he was drunk and he was just helping out John Boorman. And I'm thinking the Japanese character down on the beach who's listening to this and is, just kind of getting all paranoid and wants to keep him out, is thinking, not only have I got an American, also stranded on this island, but it's a damn crazy one. And in the end, and I don't know, you can never tell if this was the character's plan, but after he pees on him and the Japanese sold runs off into the ocean to wash off, he's like, now I've got everything. And he just gets into the camp and he's stealing his water and all of this because, it took a peeing incident for this Japanese guy to finally stop defending his position.
Yeah. It just took Lee Marvin a wee bit longer to get all the stuff. Troy Pacelli, thank you for the super chat. He says, congratulations on, wow, everybody thinks I'm at 1,000 subs, which would be, no, I'm kidding. I know you meant 100K. That's funny that everyone shortens it to 1K. RB deserves more decimals. I got to see this film. My great uncle was in the Battle of Okinawa, POW. Oof. I'm glad he survived. Really. KBA, thank you for the super chat. He says, so you never have to talk about manscaping. I appreciate that very much. Very much. Jason Henderson says, they're still teaching Marvin's piss attack at West Point to this day. Oh. Somewhere along the way after this, it's important to point out, Marvin gets away back into the jungle, and at this point Mifune's like, I'm gonna get him no matter what. At this point, he literally just pissed on me. I'm gonna kill him. And the rain starts coming down real hard, and Marvin is exhausted. He hasn't had enough water, he hasn't had enough food, and he collapses from exhaustion in basically a muddy, swampy area. Like, just Mifune happens upon him, takes Marvin's knife away while he's unconscious, and think this is my opportunity to kill him. And then he turns him over and realizes he's really incapacitated and helpless. Like, there's nothing he's going to do. It's not a trick.
Probably on the verge of dying. You know, dehydrated. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's like, you see it on his face that it's like, this enemy is now unarmed, incapable of even walking. There's no honor in killing this guy like this, but it doesn't mean I can't make him my prisoner. So he turns around and ties him to a tree in the rain, and he's got him kind of tied up, like this. And Lee Marvin is still like covered in mud, but Lee Marvin for days, it seems, just keeps psyching him out by staring at him all the time. He just never stops staring at Mifune, and it freaks Mifune out a little bit. He tries blindfolding him. He even tortures him like this on the beach. He's like playing this twisted game of Marco Polo where he's like throwing a rock in one direction and Marvin doesn't know what's going on. And then somehow Marvin eventually gets out of that contraption while Mifune is away. Mifune's looking for food or something. If he's foraging, he comes back. Marvin's out of the thing. This is the other stylized Lalo Schifrin wank moment in this movie, but it's not, it doesn't pull me out of the film like the other one did. It's just simply noteworthy. Here's the moment he finds Marvin gone.
I'll win a few, lose a few.
So I skipped a bunch of redundant sequences in the next few bits because I want to jump to the raft moments. But I did find this interesting, Tony, that, and I don't know if this is me reading into the film too much, you keep me honest, but if he had gone to Mifune right at the beginning with pacifism and mercy and just begging for water and whatever, I don't think he would have earned Mifune's character's respect. I think it's something where they're earning each other's respect. In other words, I'm not going to be your prisoner and I'm not going to be your bitch. Like, I'm going to fight toe to toe until I get equal treatment. And so they stake out their claims, in other words. And I think that's what helps. It makes their eventual comradeship, I think, feel more authentic. I don't know. That's how it's me. It's like, in the process of all this, he does the same things to Mifune. He makes him drag stuff around the beach, and it's basically quid pro quo. It's like, you did this to me, I'm doing this to you. And then at one point, and I didn't get a clip of this because it was too long to try and put together, there's this hilarious moment where he's still cooking meals for both of them, and the shell bowl falls over after hours of trying to prep this meal, and it spills everywhere, and Marvin just has a conniption. He's just like, I'm over it. And he walks over with his knife, and he undoes Mifune's bonds, and he's like, look, he's like, I'm cooking for you, I'm cooking for me, I'm over it, I'm done, I've had it. He's like, you gotta pull your weight. He's like, so you get up and you start cooking because I'm over it. And then he like walks off to the beach, and he's just like huffing and puffing. And Mifune's kind of like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'm free now. You know, like, I guess I'm free. And they start arguing over the next few days, weeks, whatever it is. They're arguing over a log. Like Lee Marvin says, this is my log. And Mifune's trying to make a primitive raft because he found like a wooden tray wash up on the beach. And so there's this moment here where Mifune is trying to pass time by making this intricate rock garden. And then Marvin passes the time by messing with it.
Yeah.
Sure.
So then he has to go back to the corner and fix it. And they're basically just effing with each other. Like, it's just constant.
From those scenes onward, you know, from that initial scene where he cuts him free and he's like, I'm cooking for you. I'm sure a lot of people would somewhat use the analogy of like, oh, they're starting to become like an old married couple.
Mm-hmm.
Even more so for me, I was watching that and it was reminding me of, you know, some of the arguments I've had with my wife over the last 10 years. And the reason being is that when Grace gets really, really angry with me, she stops speaking English and starts shouting at me in Thai. I've got no fucking idea what she's saying. I'm like, okay, yep.
You know what? It's probably best that you don't know what she's saying, because it actually saves the marriage a little bit. It's like,
yes, yeah. That's probably why she does it. She can say whatever the hell she wants, and I don't know.
Brian Dillingham, thank you for the Dillinghamsm. He says, for K rations. And then Articulated Chad says, stupid typo, shipwreck would be ashamed, 100K. You didn't have to do that, Chad. I appreciate it, though. But, I mean, if you really want to talk to Shipwreck about it, like, I don't know what to tell you, man. If Christian Slater is budget Jack Nicholson, then Shipwreck is budget Christian Slater. We now get to a point in the story where they're starting to they never learn each other's language. Like, this isn't the 13th Warrior where Antonio Banderas learns to speak Nordic like over a campfire in a week, but it's more about they're finally at a point where they're not at each other's throats, but they're also running out of things for their brains to occupy them, and they don't want to be on this island anymore, and nobody's coming to get them. So they get into this argument, and Mifune kind of shuts down, and he's sitting in his little cave spot, just trying to like, almost like waking meditation, where he's just trying to cool down. And Marvin,
that's exactly what Grace does.
Something that I should really look into for myself and everybody else listening. I think it's a good policy. And Marvin has reclaimed his log. He's like, this is my log, you can't use it for your raft. And then he starts yelling about how it was a crappy raft anyway. And then he just starts going in hard on him about his obvious raft ambitions. But again, these two guys don't speak the same language.
Now, you want to build a raft, you got to talk to somebody who knows how to do it. Do you want to build a raft? Raft, Look. Sailing over the bounding main raft.
They're sort of figuring each other out, I guess. Like, yeah. And this is the part, Tony, where they start to finally, they're able to pantomime communicate, where he's able to say the word bamboo, which Mifune's able to, he's like, where are we going to get the bamboo? Where did you get the bamboo for this water trough? Where did you? Yep. And then Mifune, he like points to the bamboo and he's like, bamboo. And then Mifune says, up on the bluff. It's up on the bluff. And so they start throwing down all the bamboo to build
which is a wonderful little sequence. Like I remember watching that going at this point in the film, which is probably about halfway through. Like, this is the closest thing we've seen to a set piece. It's literally just these two guys chopping bamboo and throwing it off the top of the bluff. Which, you know, and they're throwing it straight into the water, and then they've got to go into the water later and collect it. But there was something about that little moment that I just really enjoyed. I had a smile on my face, and I was like, the way it's shot, the music.
Lalo Schifrin's music is not like out of control at that moment. Yeah. It's a great scene, and then it leads into where I think this whole movie's concept came from, which is two guys speaking two different languages, trying to communicate, but depending on what side of the audience you are, you're only going to get half the story, which as much as John Boorman says, what I would love to do is I would love to just see the subtitles for Mifune's dialogue at some point. I would love to know what he's saying. I infer, just like Lee Marvin, like we are in the position of Lee Marvin in this movie when you watch it. If you don't speak Japanese, you are with Lee Marvin along for this journey. And if you are a non-English speaking Japanese person, you are with Mifune for this ride. It's amazing. But they have these discussions about building this raft, and here's just one clip from it, which is so cool.
No, you're not listening. You have to have a couple of sweeps on the side and a tail, otherwise...
It's like... and there is this turnabout at that point, which I thought was really cool, because we just saw Mifune shut down while Lee Marvin was coming at him saying, you want to build this raft? You want to build this raft? And Mifune's just like looking into the middle distance, like, please just get this guy to just leave me. You know, I'm over this right now.
Yeah.
Right after that sequence, everything flips that you just saw where they're talking about the raft. And suddenly Marvin is shut down and he's sitting on a log, just staring into the middle distance. And Mifune is trying to get him to understand the kind of raft they need to build. And so Mifune is having this moment. It's so good. It's so good.
Which obviously, as we learn a little bit later in the film, one of the challenges with the raft that they have to build is that, you know, they've got to get past the reef, and then they've got to get past the waves, all of the swell, which is exactly what happens to Tom Hanks in Castaway. And I'm watching that thinking, Castaway wasn't as original as I thought it was.
Yeah. If only Toshiro Mifune had produced a volleyball, then it would have been game, set, match for Castaway.
Well, you know what? Maybe Lee Marvin's character is Captain Wilson.
It's not outside the realm of possibility.
Yeah. But you know, but the good thing again is that you just see this play out. Whereas in the Tom Hanks movie Castaway, I think he actually, you know, he has like half a portaloo or something washes up on the island, and rather than respecting the intelligence of the audience, he has to explain it to Wilson so that we know what's going on, rather than just watching it play out and then figuring it out later. So.
There is a little bit of tension that remains, but it's tension that is, I thought it was so well applied, because we get to a point as the audience where we have also, like Marvin, fallen into a sense of security. And I don't even mean false. I'm not trying to say false. I don't say false. It is a sense of security, though. And then as they've gotten their raft almost finished, and they're smoking their fish that night, and they're waiting for the fish to cook, and Marvin is looking at the map from his survival raft, Mifune is sharpening their knives, and he's getting the knives ready for the next day of work. And there's this kind of moment where Marvin hears the scraping of the knife, and you see Mifune sharpening it, and you can see on Marvin's face this kind of, I'm letting the enemy have my weapon, and he's sharpening it, and it's this kind of like, but then Mifune just walks over. He gets up with both of them, walks over, and just, you know, puts Marvin's knife down in front of him, and then walks over to the other side of the campfire to play his flute that he's made. And so you're thinking, okay, well, yeah, these guys have finally reconciled whatever differences they had. They know what's important. And then that log falls over in the fire while they're sitting there, and this happens. That's the clip that's going to risk getting this thing demonetized. But I had to show you that because they both jumped at a shadow, and then they both looked at each other like, "Are you going to do something? Are you going to do something? Are we're not going to kill each other? Okay, all right. So everything's still just like it was. Cool. All right. You go back to your flute. I'm going to go back to my map. Right? Okay, great.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think even if either of the, you know, I'm sure the characters probably still from time to time are thinking, you know, if I just get rid of this guy. I think they both realize that they can't operate that raft with any hope of survival alone, which again, we don't know at the time as an audience until we actually see what they end up what they end up going through. Another really cool little detail that I appreciated is when the Japanese character is there sharpening the American's knife. You see how much shorter it was? It was like, this knife has been through hell over the last, you know, month or 2 months that they've been stranded on this island. It's like an inch and a half shorter than what it was when he first landed, because it gets used every day. And that was just a beautiful little a little detail that I really appreciated.
Everything about this movie took into account what survival would look like for every single thing in their hands. Like, it's like, you know, our beards get longer, our knives get smaller. Like, it's a whole just, it really is a movie that's so subtle in those kind of elements that I think it gets underappreciated. I think if you don't pick up on details like that, you could easily see this movie as just kind of like, it was okay. And it's like, no, this film has a lot of very daring, interesting going on. Now they get the raft together. The raft holds up. It gets past the reef, and then they sail out. And then there's kind of like this time lapse montage where they take the sail up. They put the sail down at night. And then they finally get to some islands. When they get to some islands, they raft through them a little bit. They sail through them, yelling in both languages, trying to see if they can find anybody. They don't hear anything, but then they come up on a shore, and they come across this installation, this bombed out military installation. And at first, you know, Mifune is yelling in Japanese, and Marvin's like, "Oh, no, don't. They might shoot us, you know, whatever." You know, he still doesn't want to get caught by the Japanese. But Mifune goes running in there, yelling, you know, for anybody that can hear him. And then Marvin starts to notice that there's a lot of American equipment strewn around. And he has the most interesting reaction, I think, in the whole movie.
No! Hey! Don't shoot! Don't shoot! Hey, he's my friend! Hold your fire!
He's like, he's my friend. Hold your fire. Don't shoot. Like, and it's such a real reaction. It's like, if Americans are here and my buddy goes running up there, they're gonna gun him down. Like, they're not gonna think about it. You know?
Yeah, it's he sees that the printing of the US equipment on the ground, and his immediate response is, "Don't hurt my friend." And he you know, puts himself in danger and runs out. And it's like this relationship has turned so much. You know, that there's a moment on the raft that I wanted to ask you right back at the start of this show. I said to you that one of the things I really appreciated is that they don't dumb anything down for the audience. And there is,
Mhm.
I've walked away with certain questions. There's a moment when they're on the raft when you hear aircraft overhead. And Lee
Oh.
Marvin, I
Mhm.
think he wakes up the Japanese
Mhm.
character and says, aircraft, aircraft, aircraft. And he grabs the whistle and he starts blowing the whistle. And Toshiro Mifune grabs the whistle off him and throws it in the ocean like, no. And I'm still like, why? Does Toshiro Mifune say like, no, that's an American thing, and if that's a Japanese plane, they'll shoot us? Or I didn't know what to think.
Well, was that an American whistle? Because didn't Marvin find that amongst Mifune's equipment? Because he then said tweet tweet or something like that on the
Yeah,
island.
I couldn't remember. I wasn't
Mhm.
sure. He might have found it in Mifune's equipment, but I think Mifune may have gotten it out of his life raft right at the start. I couldn't
Yeah,
remember.
that it's hard to keep track of some of those tinier
Yeah,
things.
yeah.
I remember Marvin finding the whistle and going, "Huh, tweet tweet." Like,
Yeah.
and my conjecture would be that Mifune either thinks that if they call attention to themselves, either the Japanese have orders to strafe, or that he thinks the Americans will strafe. Either way, it's almost like he thinks alerting airplanes to our position is more dangerous than helpful at this point.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I could pinpoint from it. Yeah.
But even with that said, it really doesn't matter. It's
Mhm.
that's part of the unique experience of this film. You know,
Yep.
I didn't get to the end of it going, I'm annoyed that they didn't explain that to me. Like I
Right.
didn't need a
Mhm.
Charlie Sheen voiceover. You know, the war was in ourselves and we fought each other. Like fuck.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's why that does me no good.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. This is where things rapidly they rapidly start reverting, and we start to understand a lot about what this movie structure has set up, because they get inside and they find that there's nobody there. No Japanese, no Americans are
Yeah.
there. They're all gone. And there's a lot of leftover equipment, uniforms, cigarettes, like all kinds of stuff that they're finding, scrounging here and there.
Sake.
Sake, yeah, he finds bottles of sake. But what they also find are scissors and razors and mirrored surfaces in the hospital wing of this facility. So they're able to finally get a shave, and they both shave. After they shave, they decide they're going to put on clean clothes that they found, and then they're going to have a nice drink together, which turns into like 10 drinks together.
Yeah.
They're drinking warm sake, and Lee Marvin doesn't consider the fact that a Life magazine that he found that has had pictures of Japanese casualties, because it's an American magazine and it's got pictures of the war with Japanese casualties, was something that his friend was eventually going to pick up. And unfortunately, he starts looking through it after they've already had a few. And Lee Marvin has had enough that his tact has kind of left him. And right at that moment, as Mifune's getting heated about the images he's seeing, Lee Marvin starts dogging on him about Asian religion. And this is kind of part of what occurs.
How come you guys don't believe in God? You listening? God?
That black part wasn't supposed to be on the end. That was the whole clip. But I guess I accidentally left some stuff in there. It wouldn't be a War Stories if Michael didn't screw up one clip. But that was where I realized, oh, it's like Solomon's hair. Like the moment they cut their hair back, suddenly they're back in the mode of you versus me, us versus them. We're now back in our military service orders mode. Like we're getting closer and closer to the conflict again, and farther and farther away from our own primal survival needs. And so now we're falling back into patterns, and it's happening very rapidly. It's the closest thing. I think it's more of a human statement than it is a political statement. I think it's just more about human nature. It doesn't say, because it's not saying whether, it never says the Japanese are bad and the Americans are good or vice versa. It's really just making a statement about, civilization. Really, it's like the farther you get away from civilization, the more civilized you might actually become, and the closer you get back to this civilized world, the more biased and dogmatic you can become. I think that's the closest it comes to a message. But what did you get out of that?
It's very much about the human emotion. So you've seen these two characters physically deteriorate, but grow stronger together, and you can't deny the symbolism. Like it's such a jarring visual image when they sit down together to have a drink, and they are clean shaven, the hair's combed, they're in clean clothes, and the fact that the American character is like, he's going on and on about God and why Japanese don't believe in God, while the Japanese character is going through this magazine, which Lee Marvin we'd seen in the film, he had thumbed through and seen the same pictures not too long earlier. And he's completely oblivious to the fact that this is potentially going to be upsetting to the Japanese character. I think it might be making a bit of a comment about the effects of alcohol as well, but I appreciate
it. Sure. But I mean, there's nothing new about a bar brawl, right? No. The final moment in this film, as the argument accelerates or escalates, is one of contention for the film itself, because Boorman's original ending was rejected by the studio after it was done. Apparently it played in preview screenings to American audiences, but it didn't go wide with that ending in America. But I think it was the preview screenings in America. It had the original ending, and everybody at the time, I guess, with their little review cards, thought that the ending was anticlimactic. So the studio said, we've got to fudge up a new ending, and it's got to have some more punch to it. But they couldn't get Mifune back, and they couldn't go back to that location, and they couldn't refilm any of that. They were done. So they tacked on this ending, which I'm going to show you. The only country this ending didn't play in was France, because France had a rule as part of their very artistic-driven culture, where and you know how they love the director of a film. The French love the director. They said, I'm sorry, we cannot screen this film in France without the director's original ending. And so only in France did the original ending get played. But this studio tacked on ending played everywhere else. And this is the original ending of, when I say original, I mean the theatrical ending of Hell in the Pacific. This is not the director's ending, which was the one he wanted, which was the one the French mandated stay on the film. This is the one the studio put on the film. I don't want to confuse anybody. Here is the studio mandated ending to this film. Was that the ending you saw first, Tony?
That's the first time I've seen that.
Oh, okay. So you had a copy with that ending already on it, the original ending, the director's ending. You had the director's ending.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you think?
Wow.
Right.
And is that it? Does it just stop there?
It cuts to a still frame of a shot that you see. It's the background that Lee Marvin is walking off into the distance of, but Lee Marvin's not in the shot. And it's just a still frame of that with the end over it.
So just to kind of explain to the audience, Michael had told me about the two different endings, and he had sent me the director's original ending so that I was able to view the two. However, the movie that I downloaded in 4K, watched it in 4K, obviously had the director's original ending,
which is wonderful. I'm so glad that that happened.
Yeah, because having seen the director's original ending, they haven't just thrown in a shot of the explosion. They've actually done that in the edit on the.
Yeah, and if you watch real closely, I'll play it again. You can actually see them. They still frame right before they shake the image. Like it just everybody pauses. And I swear that shot of the explosion is from the movie Tobruk. I don't even think it's definitely not from that movie. That's a shot pulled from another film.
So for those of you who haven't seen this, the director's original ending.
And I have it right here if you'd like me to play it first.
Okay, yeah.
No, go ahead if you want to describe it.
Yeah, they have this kind of drunken argument. Well, Lee Marvin really loses his temper. He's kicking over the fire. He's shouting at him, and the Japanese character who actually is quite heartbroken by what he's just seen in this magazine, and said, it's time for us to part ways. And the American character actually dons a backpack and some, he's got his web gear on his belt, walks off one way, and the Japanese soldier, he puts on his jacket and his officer's hat and some gloves and walks off in another direction, and they go their separate ways, and the film ends.
And here are sections of that ending to show you the difference. They just walk off in two different directions after having a final look at one another. And I think it is really a shame that the film studio at the time and the audience at the time, the test audience, did not see the understated power of that ending. Like, not everything ends in an explosion. And that was such a disservice to the movie. And I'll tell you, Tony, the first time I watched the film on the Blu-ray had said you can watch it with an alternate ending. And I was like, that didn't really tell me that it was the original. I had no context for what they were offering me on that option. So I went, no, I'll just watch the theatrical version. And when that ending happened, I was like, this is the stupidest ending I've ever seen. I mean, it's like literally the drama's building and they're having their final discussion, and then all of a sudden, and they're dead, And I'm like, what? So I immediately went and skipped ahead to the ending on the other branching version. And I was like, well, I made the wrong choice. Damn. And so I've never made that mistake since. But it's really the director's ending is really it's a brave thing to do in a movie where it's like he committed the whole time to this character study. He committed the whole time to two guys trying to get to know each other from opposing armies and trying to survive together. And what is an ultimate end to this relationship once they get back closer to the fight? Once they get back, what is the ultimate end? And I love the idea that they've known each other this long and they've survived together this long. They might realize that there's still going to be animosity, but they can't hurt each other at this stage. They're just going to have to walk away. And I don't know. I thought it was a really cool ending. What did you think?
Well, it makes me wonder. As I said, I read a very little bit about this film after I'd watched it. And again, I think $4 million budget. It only made back $3 million. It was considered an absolute bomb. And I'm thinking, well, might have had something to do with that ending, because if initial reviews were with that ending, I would like to see how this film would have fared if the studio hadn't interfered with that, because it just breaks everything.
Yeah.
It really it's a real that's one of the worst examples I've ever seen of studio interference.
Yeah.
And I just watched that live here on a channel with 110,000 subscribers. Now I'm really nervous.
It was so funny because when we came back from the clip, I saw the look on your face and I thought, I think this is the first time Tony's seeing this.
Yeah.
I didn't want to assume though, because
I actually no. So I watched the film, and you had sent me the original director's ending file. I downloaded that and I ended up watching that 3 times, thinking, is it something really small that I'm missing?
Well,
because then I went onto YouTube and searched Hell in the Pacific ending and watched 3 of them on there, and it was all the director's original ending again. And I actually couldn't find the theatrical ending.
That is super encouraging, because you got to understand, I had no idea, based on my experience, what version is available for download. And if they have reinstated the original ending as you clearly demonstrate, then good. Throw that other thing in the trash. Like, really. Yep. Like it's bleh. It is the worst hatchet job I've ever seen on a film that's so good up to that point. It is just and what a weird non-message for it to throw into the movie. Like, oh yeah, these 2 guys, they learned all this stuff and they did all this stuff and they survived all this stuff, and oh yeah, you can just get killed by a random artillery shell landing in an area that doesn't even have a combat zone anymore. Really?
Yeah, there's obviously there's been this huge battle on that island, and they've moved on to another objective. They're both the Japanese and the Americans. There's no one there. Yeah.
So that's the movie, everyone, and it's one of the most interesting war films I think I've ever seen. I love this movie. It's one that I'm really glad that I have in my collection. And I like talking about this movie in the same way that I like talking about things like Ice Cold and Alex and other films where it's a very, very forensic character study of a limited cast. Not that I don't like the movies that are casts of thousands, like Waterloo and stuff like that, and Zulu. Those, when they're done well, as we've demonstrated, they're done really well. But there's also something to be said for the very focused war film. So
this is I don't think you even need to mention the fact that this is a war film. This is just a very beautifully unique cinematic experience of any kind of film. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It doesn't feel, I know some people don't like watching old films.
Right.
It doesn't feel like an old. It's so unique. It's still refreshing today. 50, 60 years after it first came out. So, another reason to go and watch this film is because Toshiro Mifune, his legs can act better than what some people think is the last real movie star. Give me a break.
Oh,
his legs have more acting. The way he stands and walks, and that's
there is
a full physical performance, which he's known for, obviously, in his samurai movies as well. But you showed the clip earlier of when Lee Marvin's tied to the log and he's making him walk up and down the beach, and Toshiro Mifune is walking as well, and I'm just like, his legs are acting. His legs.
Yeah, he knew how to make his body part of the performance. Like, it wasn't and of course that also speaks back to his immense control, his muscular control, like every move. What?
Sorry, KBA's comment.
Oh, his legs are taller. Yeah, well, that's true too. It's Mifune is he deserves he deserves the legendary status that is heaped upon him. Well, Jesse, you're asking, so we will tell you. I thought, Tony, that since we had been given the offer by Master Son 42 of doing Bat 21, that we could entertain the idea of doing Bat 21 and having Master Son 42 as our special guest for the next war.
I'm in.
Okay.
I don't even need to think about it.
Okay.
So, that's a film that I've watched once or twice. But like, you know, when it first came out on video rental, which was I want to say was early 90s. Gene Hackman film, and my memory of it is, I know it is a fighter pilot shot down behind enemy lines in Vietnam, Gene Hackman, and that I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
But I would have been 14 or 15. I wonder how it looks now. So, and of course, Master Son 42 is an awesome guy. I'd love to.
My God. I can't wait to do I cannot wait to do a war stories with Master Son 42. Master Son 42 is kind of like one of those moments in like a movie series or a TV series where, well, I'll draw this analogy, which is so appropriate given Master Son and my friendship history. Remember how we all thought that Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man was going to be like the central focus of the MCU for the whole run, but somewhere along the way, very rapidly, Captain America became the emotional heart of the whole saga. Well, that's kind of what I envision for Master Son 42. I envision that he could very easily, Tony, like I can see him becoming like the Captain America, like you're Iron Man and I'm Hawkeye or whatever in the MCU. And then suddenly he shows up and suddenly it's like, oh, I can't wait to watch War Stories with Master Son 42. I can totally see it happening. And I'm okay with that, you know, because I check my ego at the door.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I think I'm more of a Phil Coulson.
King Eric, the greatest of all, thank you for the super chat. He says, IMDb says the explosion ending is from the Peter Sellers movie, The Party. I actually have that movie on Blu-ray, so I will check that out for sure. And then,
I mean, it's a miniature. I can tell it's a miniature. So
yeah. And Master Son says, put me in, coach. You're in. So the next film, War Stories, 2 Fridays from now, will be Bat 21 with Gene Hackman. Great. Well, any parting words, Tony, before we end this stream?
Go watch this film if you haven't seen it. And anyone, you know, whether war film, not war film, if you're a human being and you like cinema, you will enjoy and appreciate this. But get the director's original ending.
Yeah, for sure. And fortunately, from what Tony says and what he's experienced, it looks like the director's ending has finally pollinated all the versions on streaming and everything else, which is great.
Actually, this film in its entirety is available on YouTube, and I even clicked on that and fast forwarded all the way to the end to watch that, and that had the director's original ending on there as well. So
well, I'm glad to hear that, because I think that other ending should be relegated to like the bottom trough of bonus features. Like, hey, you want to see what happens when a movie studio totally F's shit up? All right, everybody. Well, we'll see you in 2 Fridays from now, and we will be doing Bat 21 with special guest Master Son 42. We'll see you then.
Can't wait.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.